How are you, Andy? You well?
Yeah, good. Thank you. Yourself?
Yeah, pretty good, thanks. Pretty good. Thanks for doing this. I know it's probably not that early for you, is it? 8 o'clock as a rider?
No, I'm one of those riders that goes out at 10.
Oh, yeah. Okay. None of this nonsense at sort of 6:30 or 7.
No, even if I training before work or studies was never sort of something I really did because it just makes you feel tired for when you need to be feeling at your best. I can sort of get away with training if I'm mentally tired, but I can't get away with using my brain when I'm physically tired.
Yeah, yeah. So you worked out what works for you.
Yeah.
Um, cool. Well, look, as I say, thanks for doing this. There are a few things I'd really like to chat to you about. I think it's almost a year since we did the interview for the Gear Changer blog, and I think
Yeah, I think so.
yeah, I think it was July last year. You just finished your degree, so it'd be good to talk about how you combined your riding with your degree, and also to cover, I suppose, about your broader role within the team. I know that you're very clear that you want to stress that you're a rider for your abilities, but there are other roles that you play within the team, and you've helped that SwiftCarbon Pro develop.
It's sort of
Working with
dropped off a bit in the last year or so, just with work, and there not really been much in the way of racing. There's still been some work with some of the sponsors in terms of like product development. Rule 28 have been sort of the ones who've really jumped at the opportunity to work with us closely rather than just supply kit and develop on their own.
Yeah, cool. We can cover a bit of that. That'd be great. And obviously talk about coaching and the development of your own coaching business, and probably some of the, I suppose, the philosophies, the things that matter to you in coaching, because having looked at what you tweet about, what you write about, you have some some strong views about certain elements of coaching and of cycling, whether it's weight, nutrition, and whether bar bags are acceptable or not. But
Yeah.
let's wind the clock back. I mean, when we spoke, you just finished university. Am I right? In your first year, you were still riding as an amateur, so fully amateur with KTM.
Yeah.
So was it fairly simple then? Combining the two, were there still challenges then?
That was the first year I was doing UCI races, so I had to go away for the RAS in Ireland, but I don't think I had any exams during that period. But then the Tour of Bior in Romania, I needed to reschedule some assessments just so that I could sit them at a different date, which was fairly easy through the university. They were very supportive about it because I've been on the scholarships team there. But that didn't really prove particularly difficult. I found balancing the training and the workload was all right. The only time it sort of became difficult was during my dissertation, and that took charge, and training took a back seat quite significantly.
Mm. Was there any guilt in that, or were you pretty focused that you're getting a good degree was really important to you?
I was more focused on the degree. There wasn't really any feeling of I need to go and ride more. It was just focusing on that, because before I went to uni, I sort of resigned myself to the fact that I'm never going to make it as a big professional cyclist. And I still maintain I'm not going to end up as a cyclist who's going to make a big living out of riding a bike. So uni was seen as the long-term thing that needed to be focused on. Well, short-term to focus on for the long term.
Mm. You mentioned as well that seeing other riders who were doing the same thing. You mentioned Max Stedman, that
Mm-hmm.
that gave you the belief that it was possible that you could follow that similar path. What sort of impact did it have on you?
I guess it just gave me a bit of faith. I mean, also learning through studying as well, that unless you're doing like massive stage races, you don't need to be doing 5 hours, 3 or 4 times a week. It's not really going to be any benefit. So just training at the weekends, the big hours, and sort of one day during the week when I didn't have lectures, and then the rest of it just fitting in shorter sessions with sort of focusing on the things that I needed to.
Mm.
So I guess that's sort of the point where I started looking at myself a bit in terms of someone to coach up slightly.
And then when did things get a bit more serious? Because KTM folded as a team, but Paul Lamb was looking for sponsors, looking to develop a new team, and that's when you did play, quite a pivotal role in reaching out to sponsors that you felt were important. You said you were quite specific about who you wanted to reach out to.
Yeah, we didn't want to work with brands that there'd be question marks over it a bit, or ones that we couldn't work with. So if you want to be riding bikes on a cycling team, you want to be riding bikes that you know are going to be good. So it's just a case of finding something that would be a good race bike. I mean, I'm all for the aeroness of stuff, but sometimes it's a bit of a nightmare to maintain. I think now it's easier with disc brakes. Integrated rim brakes are an absolute pain in the ass. But yeah, Swift were a company who had done very good race bikes for NFTO. The riders had all complained when they'd gone to felt because the bikes weren't as good. Another thing I didn't realize is how often bikes end up snapping in teams like that. That was something they had with felt, but Swift seemed to be quite good for that. So team on a lower budget, bikes that won't break is always good. And yeah, it was just focusing on kit that we believed would fit the bill and work well for the riders. And there's been some sort of almost trial and error and such throughout the years, but we've sort of settled into a point now where we're working with brands and teams that we can work with them. They deliver brilliant products, and from its marketing point of view, it's very difficult to say how great something is if you don't actually believe in it. And also not really high up on my list of ethical things of trying to promote something to someone that doesn't work or isn't any good.
Yeah, so you didn't want to be a rider or a team that was pushing out those messages saying, "Hey, great, we're riding this and we're wearing this," and then behind the scenes, everyone's having a gripe about it.
Yeah, I mean, there's things I've been public about on stuff with like we've not got ridiculously aero sculpted bikes, but at the same time, it's quite nice having a bike that you can maintain yourself easily. They might have a bit more paint on them than some others, but also I've had quite a few incidences where someone has gone into me on their bike and all that's been damaged on mine is some paint chips. So nice to have the extra protection rather than having a chainstay snap or something like that.
Yeah, is it a bit of a bun fight sometimes? Because as you say, you're going to brands that you feel have a a good name in the industry. I'm sure that there are other teams doing the same thing. Is it a bit of a pitching process?
There have been a couple of times where we've been talking with someone and then suddenly they've announced they're with another team. But that's just business contracts and the world that cycling is.
Yeah, I mean that's a skill in itself. I mean you're riding a bike, you're training, you're doing all the stuff to perform on the bike. Going out there and pitching the concept of a new team, that's a completely different skill set. What was it like the first time you did that, and how do you feel you developed in that kind of role?
I'd say initially it was almost easier because you just go at it all guns blazing without any care in the world or idea of sort of the intricacies of the business side of it and some of the slyness of it as well. I've become a bit more aware of that.
What's the slyness?
Oh, just if someone hears that you might be approaching one sponsor, they might try and dig in there first and counter offers and suggest to avoid other teams, which is not
Are there some dirty tactics?
Really my thing. I think there are, but at the end of the day, it's part of the game we play.
Yeah, obviously you wouldn't resort to that. You just have to battle against.
No, that's part of the reason why I've sort of backed off from doing it a bit. I do sort of more work with the sponsors that we currently have, rather than trying to bring them in, and I've become a lot more secretive about ones I'm trying to bring in.
Yeah, yeah. So when did that come together? So I suppose, what was that lead time from you speaking to Paul, and he was putting his commitment to wanting to create a new team. You're going out there helping finding the right kinds of brands. What was that lead time from then to
I knew
actually,
about
right, you've got a team?
the desire for a UCI team midway through 2018, and then talks with Swift were at the cycle show that year. I just popped over there before a lecture and got talking with them, and then that was the initial start of it. And then it took a while to get everything nailed in, get the UCI license sorted, the bank guarantees, I think it is. I don't know so much of the intricate details of how to actually get the team going. That was all up to Paul, and I was just getting in touch with sponsors and seeing if they wanted to support the team. But it was very late in the day, everything, which was stressful, but got sorted.
Yeah, yeah. And just touching on university again, I think you said that am I right in saying that you lived at home during that time at uni? And you said that a lot of the accommodation, they wouldn't take bikes. Some wouldn't even take turbo trainers.
Yeah, especially with uni accommodation, it's small environments, and bringing a bike in there, if you've gone out training on a wet day, it's going to be filthy. Turbo trainer, even with the direct drive ones, it's still going to make a hum and a buzz, and they just can't let you do that. Like all the guys who I knew in halls who were video gaming, whatever, they had to wear headphones when they were doing it.
So you've got to get on well with your parents.
Yeah, we sort of, I have my room as my office, and the cellar is where I've got turbo set up.
Yeah.
So I sort of like living with housemates in a way. We each have our own areas where we tend to stay more, offices as such.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you came out of the degree with a first.
Mm-hmm.
And what did that feel like through all that effort and the training at the same time?
It was a relief, but also when I was looking at the results, I was thinking, where did I lose those marks?
Really? Even though you got a first?
Yeah, my dissertation, it was sort of that point, because it was so close to perfection. It was, where could I have done it a little bit better to maybe get that 100%?
That sounds like an attitude, no doubt, that is part of your cycling as well.
Yeah, I think it's sort of, I tend to find I'm better at committing at one particular thing at a time. And when it was uni, it was wholly committed on that. And if anything, that helped more with the riding, because then there just wasn't any stress around it. And like the issue with training is the buildup of stress, be that mental or physical. So when that mental stress had disappeared, it sort of made the training easier.
Yeah, that's interesting. That I mean, I interviewed Max a couple of weeks ago, and when he was at university, he had a knee injury, so he wasn't able to train properly. So he could just focus on the university life and enjoying freshers and everything. And he said at that time that university gave him that switch off. If he'd just been riding his bike and he was injured, that's a massive vacuum to fill, and your mind can go in different and dark places.
Yeah, I had that in 2015. I had a knee injury and I wasn't riding for 4 months. And because that's all I was doing, it was absolute mental hell.
Yeah, and that covers a lot of sports people talk about that as if there isn't anything to focus on or switch your mind off. It's fine when it's all going well, but if you hit a bad run of form, or you get injured, or you don't get selected for certain races, then it's a big void to fill. Is that something you talk about with your clients? Because obviously you've got your coaching company as well. Is it not just stuff on the bike, but it's that mental approach as well?
Yeah, so often people, there's obviously a training plan that they have that's there to follow. And sometimes life gets in the way, or it's injury, or it's just mentally they can't do it one day, work's been particularly draining or whatever. And it's a lot of it's just reassuring them that that's fine, that it's not the end of the world if you've missed one session, or even if you've ended up with a week where it's not been great. it's not the end of anything, because it's it's sort of the athlete psychology side of it I found quite interesting. Although I didn't do specific modules in it, it's ended up linking into a lot of other things, and also just from applied knowledge of it. So it's a bit like training and diets are very similar. There'll be people who are so set and driven and focused on following a diet that if they miss, they have to have a slightly different meal one day to another, it's the end of the world. Whereas in reality, even if you've had fish and chips one evening, it's one evening where you had it, it is not going to make you even half a kilo fatter. It's not going to do anything like that. And it's just bearing in mind that it's the bigger picture of everything. So training, you have one bad session, it's not the end of the world. And also looking at it from a sort of outside perspective, I can help them feel a bit more reassured. I had one, for example, recently, you had a session where it was 3 1-minute maximum efforts and a threshold block, sort of an under and over threshold block after that. And he'd just been finding work really, really busy at the moment. And so he hadn't been able to complete the whole session, and he'd only done the 1-minute efforts, and he was really pissed off with himself. But he'd set power maxes for 1 minute on every single one of those efforts.
Yeah.
So it was like, well, you're complaining about feeling tired and not feeling good on the bike at all, yet you're clearly doing personal bests on this area, which is something we were focusing on. And it's just refocusing them onto that. So rather than thinking, oh, I missed half the session, I'm a failure, it's I set 3 power PBs. I'm obviously going quite well at the moment, even when I'm feeling tired.
Yeah. And I want to cover, how you set up your coaching business, Andy Turner Performance. I just want to, you mentioned something about weight there. That's quite, obviously there's an issue of weight in cycling, but for you, as you described yourself as an overweight kid, you said your nickname was Fat Boy when you started cycling. I mean, what kind of impact does that have when you're you're involved in a sport and that's the tag that you're given?
I think it depends. I wouldn't even say it depends on who you are as a person. It depends on what sort of day they've said it to you. One day I might have thought, oh, well, I'm just going to quit riding. Another day it was, well, I'll show them. Attitudes change week in, week out. And fortunately, they caught me at a point where it was like, well, I'll show you. But yeah, with the coaching side of things, because I offer nutrition support in there as well, but it's not setting diets for people. It's not monitoring everything you eat, and it's not being obsessed around food. It's more guidelines on what sort of things you should be eating and more about the timing. So not ever saying to people, you can't eat this or eat that. I often do coaching Q&As, and people will ask like, oh, how does cake fit into my diet? And well, you look at what most cake is, it's a lot of sugar and a fair bit of fat as well. But in terms of the amount of sugar, eat cake during and after your ride, and the sugar is going to have a benefit to your recovery. So there is a place for cake. There is a place for pretty much any kind of food.
Yeah.
I just say avoid the real processed crap. That's about it, really.
Yeah.
And eat your carbs for energy availability, both for body and mind.
Yeah. But what you described, listening to that takes the worry out of eating. I think there's so much, and you probably hear it from the clients that you're working with, and you touched on it there, an obsession of guilt. If you eat badly one day, of almost like punishing yourself the next day. You talked about a study that you read, I think when you were at university, about relative energy deficiency. Can you talk through that and how that translates into something that people would understand in terms of their training?
So something, I was a part of a study with Dr. Nikki Key, and she was looking into the effect of disordered eating, bone mineral density in cyclists. I think it was specifically male cyclists at that point, and also the sort of damage it can have to hormones, because if you do it enough, you can make it so that you won't be able to have children in the future. It can be quite serious. And I didn't realize, sort of in terms of energy availability, it's what the settings are. So I think it was 30 kilocalories per kilogram of fat-free mass is sort of the lower limit of what you want to be consuming a day. And I can't remember the exact maths for that one, what that would put me as needing to eat a day. But then the lower side was 15, where it becomes dangerous. So I think what my fat-free maths is at the moment. So yeah, 30 was the lower limit for what you'd want to be eating. And that was 2,000 calories a day, which is about what I was eating.
Mm.
And then whatever I had in training as well. Whereas the ideal for performance was 45 calories per kilogram of fat-free body mass, which would mean that I'd be needing to eat 3,000 a day, which is about what I'm eating now. And the difference is,
you said that you're actually eating more. You've lost weight. You've become leaner, but you haven't just cut down all of the
I've actually got to the stage where I don't weigh myself anymore either. It's more just a how do I feel, how do I look, and it's a niche sort of, when you look at yourself as well. If you look at yourself in the evening after you've been eating all day, it's generally going to be a case of, oh, I look fat. You look in the morning, it's sort of, okay, yeah, fairly lean. But I've stopped bothering with weighing myself, because at the end of the day, if it says, oh, you're 2 kilos heavier than you were 3 years ago, doesn't really matter. And I don't think I've really got fat to lose. So knowing the number's not actually going to benefit me in any way whatsoever. Because I've been trying to work on just building a bit of structural upper body so I can hold a more aerodynamic position. Because at the end of the day, if I weigh 2 kilos more, but I can save 30 watts all over the place all day, it's going to mean that, yes, I'll be a bit heavier on the climbs, but I'll probably be less fatigued. So I'll have about 20, 30 watts spare anyway.
Yeah. And you said, did you tweet recently that if somebody says eating's cheating, whack them over their head with a baguette and then eat the baguette?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's important, isn't it? That's an important message about eating, definitely. I mean, in all areas of life, but certainly in cycling. I think that ability to look at it more scientifically and then reach a stage where you're not actually weighing yourself, that sounds pretty healthy.
Yeah, it's taken a long time, and I'm still in certain disordered habits as well. Say disordered habits, it's actually obsessively ordered, but it's like breakfast tends to pretty much be the same every day. The post ride meal tends to be the same. The evening snack tends to be the same. There's flexibility around it. And if I go a day where or even a week where I'm not eating exactly what I'm used to eating, I don't worry about it. Whereas it used to be absolute hell for me. I couldn't go out for a meal one evening because it had to be what I needed to know exactly what I was eating, what was in it. I mean, part of what helps now is probably the broader knowledge of what is in food. I can probably recite to you the calories of what's in every single McDonald's thing, or guess it and get it pretty much spot on.
Yeah. And didn't you say that actually eating crisps is okay if you cut out lots of salt in your diet, and maybe you suffer from cramp when you're riding, but having crisps a few days before a ride is actually all right?
Yeah, I mean, I don't eat many processed foods, and when I sort of totted up the amount of salt intake, it's not much at all. And considering you need a few grams a day, I say a couple or so, it's easy to not actually consume that. And if you're exercising in the heat, if you know you're a salty sweater, simply go out riding in a dark colored jersey on a hot day and see what color the jersey comes back. You can get an idea of how much salt is exiting the system. Some people are saltier than others. It's the sweat rate that it can vary or change. And when you get the salt tablets or electrolyte drinks, they are quite low in the amount of salts in them. There's nowhere near enough. And part of that is because legally, I don't know if I remember this correctly, but I think it was Gatorade in the US. It was an electrolyte drink, also with sugars in it. So the reason it made people perform better, I think it was in American football, was because it had more sugars in it. But they took the view of, oh, well, it's got salt in it, so that's what's making them better. Because I think initially it was a very salty drink. It had enough salt in it to be beneficial, but because it tasted horrible, they added a load of sugar into it.
Right.
So what they made was the perfect electrolyte carb drink, and that was why it was good for performance. But then when it was on sale to the public who weren't exercising and doing high intensity stuff for 90 minutes or however long it is, they were consuming a drink that was full of sugar and full of salt, and they were having way too much salt than they could. So I think they had to change the formula for it, so it was a lot lower in salt, so people not exercising could still bulk buy it and drink it like a soft drink.
Yeah.
And sort of from that, a lot of electrolyte drinks are low salt because they can't risk the general public
Yeah.
consuming it and then consuming way too much. It's like with energy gels, they always say, oh, you need to have one every 20 minutes. If you're racing, yes. If you're not doing something that requires that much energy, no.
Yeah.
It's a recommendation for the peak, but it's not what everyone needs. So if you go out exercising for an hour, you don't need recovery drinks, energy gels, salt tablets, or anything like that. You just need to eat a decent breakfast, maybe grind of salt on your lunch afterwards, and it's sort of got you covered.
Yeah. No, great.
Also costs a lot less when you do it that way.
Yeah, no, exactly. And just another couple of things just before I let you go. My son is also looking to make a cameo performance, so we'll look to wrap it up in a minute. But a couple of things that you seem quite, I suppose, vocal about things that really matter to you. In what's happening in cycling, whether it's with the Black Lives Matter movement and supporting the work that is happening with the Black Cyclist Network, but also attitudes towards women. Is that something that you feel very strongly about, and that you have a role to, I suppose, as somebody with a bit of a platform to talk about it? Or was that going too far?
I wouldn't say I've got a platform as such or a role. I find that sports in particular are very, cycling's awful for it, but they're not. You don't talk about any of the important matters. I mean, at the moment in the Giro, you've got UAE Emirates, you've got Bahrain Victorious, two regimes that are questionable in their human rights. Not a fan of Ineos, the sponsor, the team. You've got to take the money where it comes from, unfortunately, to survive. And then Israel Cycling or Startup Nation Cycling Academy, I can't remember the name now.
Yeah.
The thing they put out about with what's going on at the moment with Israel and Palestine, and saying about how having the pink jersey is obviously going to make people feel better at home. And it's just forgetting the fact that the best analogy I've heard someone put was, imagine a homeless person has come into your home, or they've been put in your home, and because they need somewhere to live, which is fair, people need somewhere to live, but then that person's taken over the home, locked you in a cupboard, and don't let you do anything without their say. Mm-hmm. But people don't want to talk about this sort of thing. Yeah. And with the Black Lives Matter side of it, it's like, I've not been in any position where it could be anything comparable to that, but the sort of elitist attitudes of cycling, when I started, I showed up with short socks that had a world champs band around them because I just thought it looked nice. And you get chastised for that. You get chastised for being different. And if I'm getting that for having socks, that made me feel a little bit. So imagine what it feels like if you're being chastised for being a different color. Yeah, that's not a choice, and it's not something that should ever be used to criticize someone. And the same with women's cycling. You've got the sports director, the Belgian guy, I think it was, who had been accused of sexual assault and harassment, and then he's just back in the sport. Gianni Moscon's had lots of issues with racism, and he's still on a big contract getting paid lots of money and racing the Giro. Yeah, there wasn't really any consequence for any of the actions, so people just see it and think, oh, it's fine then. Yeah. Whereas Formula One have tried, even though it's not worked particularly well, they're sort of taking a knee beforehand, showing solidarity and actually speaking up about it. Football has done the same. And then when there was that social media boycotts, or suddenly cycling teams who have never had any interest in any of these matters suddenly jump on board and say, oh, we're not going to post anything for 3 days. It's like, I don't think I'd have noticed if you did anyway.
It's very easy to do. It's not gonna, what are they really doing to change the sport? What are they going to do from that point? They have that boycott, but then what happens next?
I think the idea was to get social media to change how you can report racism and such. I think Zwift, for example, there was some abuse of the trans community riding on there, and they weren't able to report it. There's often women cyclists on Zwift will get unsolicited chatting up from just any random bloke anywhere, and there's no way of reporting it. I think they've added an ability to report that sort of stuff now. So it does lead to some change, but at the same time, those things are still going to happen. Just because you've prevented them from being able to do something on a platform like that in person, they can still do exactly the same things. The attitudes remain, and that's not what's fixed. You're just trying to put up roadblocks in the way of them spreading those attitudes and acting upon them, but they still exist, and that's the problem.
Yeah. And just finally, and obviously there's so much to talk about, but just a final question about, obviously last year was so disrupted by COVID. It looks like this season is similar. What have you got in the calendar? What's next for you and the team?
First race, there's a test event up in Yorkshire on the 23rd of May, so that's the first thing. And then there's a race in Belgium on the 6th of June that, excuse me, we're getting everything sorted for. And then beyond that, it's seeing really what we can get to travel-wise, and really just getting the racing in before Tour of Britain, because that's the big goal for everyone.
Yeah. You're just looking at the calendar?
Yeah, just finding it. But I mean, it's quite good with work at the moment. It just means that I can focus on that as and around. And at least when I do get a calendar sorted, I can schedule in when I need to be available for calls, or when I might need to do a couple of weeks of plans in advance rather than just one. So 6th of June, I can't pronounce that, but in Belgium, 1.1. And then, looking at it, most of it's been cancelled. I'm not sure if Beaumont Trophy 4th of July is.
That's in the balance
as well.
Yeah.
And then Slag om Norge in Holland, that's another 0.1, July. There's a few here and there, and then some stage races in the lead up to Tour of Britain, which will hopefully happen and give us a good opportunity to just get the legs firing.
Yeah, great. I mean, well, I wish you all the best with the next with the racing coming up. I appreciate the frustration for all of you with the decreasing calendar.
I'm not sort of too stressed about it, to be honest. I mean, I need to do a few races in terms of getting sort of qualification results towards other things. But with having the work alongside, if there aren't so many races, it's not really that stressful, because I've just got other things I can focus on and get done. I quite enjoy working, and I'm enjoying trying to grow the business out. So
yeah,
got that still happening.
Brilliant.